Julian Ginter.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Look, the National Party claims that they are doing a great job for New Zealand's economy. And very superficially, if we look at some of the numbers, it may seem like it stacks up. It's true that GDP growth is above zero. It's actually, above 2.5%. It's one of the higher rates in the world. But what it doesn't tell us is how we're doing as a country. And the other stats that have been coming out in recent weeks tell quite a different story. So, in fact, when we look at income per capita, once we assess GDP growth alongside immigration and population growth, the truth is that income per capita is stagnating. We've had about as much population growth as we've had GDP growth. If it were even the case that GDP was really a measure of true progress in this country, which, of course, it's not. A lot of GDP growth has been driven by the Christchurch earthquake. We are not better off because one of our major cities was nearly completely wiped out in a horrific earthquake, and a lot of money has to go into rebuilding it, which has taken a lot longer than it should have because it's been poorly managed by the national government. But another really important factor that we need to look at, and I'd love the Minister to comment on this, because the Minister of Finance used to go around and give talks in the first few years that the National Party was in government and show this graph, which showed a gap between the growth in the non-tradable sector of the economy versus growth in the tradable sector of the economy. And Bill English said, we're going to fix this, we're going to turn it around. Under the Labour government, growth in the tradable sector of the economy, the really productive sector, the part that sells goods and services to the world, has been lagging, and growth among the part of the economy that's really just sort of selling things to each other, like buying and selling houses, has been growing. But the Finance Minister has stopped showing this graph. And I'll tell you why. I've got a copy of the graph right here. And that's because at the latest release in GDP figures, we saw that, in fact, the gap between non-tradables and tradables is at its widest point ever. And this is after 7.5 years of the national government. And it must be quite disappointing for the Minister of Finance. I don't blame him. I'm sure that he has every intention and had every intention of fixing this problem, but has been unable to do so. And why is that? Why is that? It's because the ideology of the National Party and the policies that they implement simply will not deliver the improvements to the economy that need to be made to have a truly productive economy. The ideology of the National Party says we need to cut taxes for the rich. We need to privatize and sell off state assets. We need to reduce environmental protection. And none of those things will actually create a more productive and prosperous economy, nor will it look after the things that are really important to New Zealanders, like protecting the natural environment and fairness and opportunity. So the sad truth is that when we look at the evidence, the National Party is failing to deliver the competitive and productive economy that they've promised, and that's because their ideology and their instinct is to protect the status quo and to look after the people like them, the people who are already rich and want to get a lot richer, the people who might want to use tax havens to avoid paying tax in their home country. Their instinct is to protect those industries. Their instinct is to not go after the multinational companies who are avoiding anywhere from $500 million to $1 billion worth of tax each year. Their instinct is instead to crack down on student loan defaulters and beneficiary fraud. And while it's all well and good, we should do those things, the reality is the value of that is much smaller. Those people are vulnerable people, and they're taking a lot less money from us than the rich and powerful are. So what we need are policies that are actually going to deliver a productive and smart economy. And the National Party has instead delivered subsidies for irrigation, which, contrary to what member Alistair Scott said, is not good for the environment at all. It encourages more intensive dairying, which is terrible for our rivers, which are already, Mr. Chair, which are already highly polluted. They've refused to set standards for water quality that would actually improve water quality. So we've got a standard for wadable rivers rather than swimmable rivers. We've got subsidies for oil and gas exploration. Now, this is actually absolute madness in 2016. When I was in Paris for the climate talks in December, I went to a conference at the OECD about green growth, and the keynote speaker there from Oxford University said in his speech that in order to meet the agreement that we signed up to in Paris, that all new infrastructure from 2017 basically would have to be carbon neutral. So, or, zero carbon. In order to achieve the goal of phasing out fossil fuels by mid-century, which is absolutely logical and necessary if we want civilization to continue to prosper as it has for the past millennia, we have to be phasing out fossil fuels now. And that is the role and responsibility of the government. It's the role and responsibility of government to protect our natural environment, to look after the most vulnerable people. And unfortunately, the National Party is simply failing to do that. And they say they're pursuing their policies because they want to achieve better economic performance, and then someday down the track we'll be able to afford to look after the environment and our people. They've got it around backwards. The way we build a productive, sustainable economy is by looking after the most vulnerable in our society, by not allowing the rich to get richer through cutting taxes and refusing to reform tax rules around foreign trusts, for example. The way that we will achieve this is by looking after the most vulnerable in society and protecting our natural environment, that which is, frankly, I think, precious to all New Zealanders. And we will hear a lot of greenwash from this government at the same time that they're pursuing oil and gas exploration, which is supposedly going to make us rich, even though oil prices have collapsed. At the same time that they're doing that, Simon Bridges, the energy minister and transport minister, goes around trying to get into a lot of photo ops with charging infrastructure for electric cars that hasn't been paid for by this government. They've got virtually no new policy to support the uptake of electric vehicles. The vast majority of their transport budget is being spent on motorways, which are not even going to resolve congestion, let alone reduce dangerous carbon pollution. They're continuing the asset sales with Kiwi Bank now, trying to squeeze out as much money as they can, suck it out of the government so they can spend it on their priorities, which are very short-term, and ultimately that is going to cost New Zealanders in the long run. That's what we saw with the asset sales with the energy companies. They've now almost cost us as much as the cash that we raised from it, which was then not even spent on productive infrastructure as the minister promised. So this national government is letting down the people who voted for them, trusting them to deliver an economy that was going to look after New Zealanders. And it's time that they took responsibility for their poor decisions. We've got lots of constructive ideas here, Minister, about how we can actually build a productive, successful economy by looking after our people and our environment. That is the smart thing to do. That is what the Green Party is committed to delivering in government. And although that government will continue to scaremonger about Green Party policies rather than engage in a constructive and informative debate and give actual reasons why they wouldn't support such policies, they will simply call it rubbish. Perfect example, as Minister Barry says it's rubbish. Why is it rubbish, Minister Barry? Why are our policies rubbish? For example, the Kiwi Bank policy that we announced. We have a problem in New Zealand that the 4 big Aussie banks are sucking out $4 billion in profits from our economy every year. And what makes sense is to use our government-owned bank to deliver wider social and economic benefits for all New Zealanders. And we could do that. We know when Kiwi Bank was first introduced, it actually did drive down mortgage rates and lending rates. But the reality is the 4 big Aussie banks, their most profitable area is here in New Zealand. And that means they're not, that's a market failure. They are not delivering benefits to New Zealanders. They're sucking out profits from New Zealand. So it does make sense to use our state-owned bank, not to earn a profit which is going to go to the government.
Mr. Chair.
I'm going to call the Honourable Minister, but I just want to warn Mr Bennett that if he's going to continuously interject, at least do it in the proper form and not involve me. The Honourable Bill English.